I'd like to first start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. I'm here in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And I will also acknowledge all the traditional owners of the lands you are all residing at the moment. Okay, we welcome everyone, and I apologize for the late invitation to the meeting, and hopefully that will be better organized next time. And I deeply apologize for this, but we really wanted to have something going for the CRE, and I don't know how much you know about the CRE. So a little bit about the Center for Research Excellence to Accelerate Stroke Trials and Innovation. Many of you are familiar with it, but we want to innovate clinical trials and also their translation into clinical practice. And we have an expert panel of people participating in the CRE and also affiliates. And if you want to become an affiliate, we'll provide some information later on, and you can also look at the website. I will I'll show you the link later on. So we want to be conducting next generation clinical trials that are co-designed with consumers and researchers in the end to deliver better healthcare for people with stroke. And this CRE is funded by NHMRC and the University of Sydney. We have different work streams. Work stream 1 is generating new knowledge. Work stream 2 is that translational piece. And then work stream 3 is developing the research workforce. And we want to facilitate clinicians to participate in research, and then also researchers to work together with clinicians and also with consumers. And workstream 4 is about facilitating collaboration. We also have some cross-cutting teams like telehealth and consumer involvement in the CRE. So I won't dwell too much on this, but we are working together. In our work stream 3, we want to develop the research workforce, and we are hoping to achieve this by exchange visit, clinical trial courses, which we are starting today, and then workshops on research grantsmanship. And our first webinar today will be followed by hopefully monthly webinars, specifically geared towards early and mid-career researchers, and we will focus on design, development, and practicalities of running a trial. Typically held live, but recorded and available on the website. So if you miss one or you want to look at it again, they will be available on the website. Good. The next webinar will be about opportunities for early career researchers, and we will invite some people to discuss opportunities and tips for writing a successful grant. At the end of the series, the first 3 or 4 webinars, we will have also a grant pitch opportunity. That is planned on the 26th of November, somewhere around Sydney. I'm being told it's probably going to be Coogee, but we're not certain yet. On the 26th of November at 11 a.m. This is part of the CRE meeting, which will be held on the 25th and 26th of November. There will be consumers available and present to also help you with that important part of co-design and give feedback on your grant, and also trialists and experts that you can have a chat with. So an excellent opportunity as well. And then I also want to advertise two more things. One, for those people that will attend the APSC meeting in Adelaide, end of September, the CRE is organizing a stroke a seminar morning, and you can see here the schedule, and very renowned speakers will discuss different trial-related topics. So if you're in Adelaide, please attend this workshop. It's looking very interesting. This was put together, I think, by a group from the Stroke Trial Network and the CRE. Especially, I think Kate Hayward has been instrumental in getting this together. All right, and then one other, but very important ad for future funding opportunities for early and mid-career researchers to some seed funding that can be leveraged. You can see the details here. And then also, if you know of a center, preferably rural or regional, that wants to be involved in clinical trials, we also have an opportunity there for a matched funding program to set them up and additional mentoring. So have a read of this, and I'm sure there will be some more information forthcoming. Okay. Good. So today's webinar, we have three researchers with a clinical background that will talk about their experience. I think they all have successfully received grant funding in the order of 50,000, so very similar to what the CRE will be funding. And they can talk about their experience, and there will be 10 minutes each, and then we will have a Q&A for all of you to ask questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, please don't hesitate to add them to the chat. I want to thank also Dan Reves, who is working in the background and who is coordinating the whole webinar series before we kick off with, I think, Caleb. Caleb is a professor of nursing at the University of Wollongong and will talk about his experience.
Thanks so much, Vincent. Just checking that you can see my slides okay and hear me okay. Perfect.
Yes.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks so much, Vincent, for that introduction. And I'm really excited that this is the first webinar, and it's great to see things kicking off. And thanks for the opportunity and the invitation to come and share with you today some of my thoughts around study designs and around about that are really appropriate for the $50,000 sort of schemes as well. As Vincent said, my name's Caleb and I'm Professor of Nursing at University of Wollongong, but also I have the privilege of leading a clinical research centre based in Blacktown Hospital. So that's wonderful, and some of my team are also online today, and I'm an investigator on the CRE as well. So today, I think my presentation really wants to, one of the key objectives is really to inspire you really to think quite programmatically about a program of work, and really to think about how seed funding can help you develop that program of work, that's a long-term sort of ambition to grow the program, of which seed funding is really critical in those early career stages as well. Just check. And so I really wanted to just start off with providing a bit of a refresher about some of the study designs that are quite commonly used, and thinking about also the hierarchy of evidence that's quite well known in terms of study designs. And I guess this pyramid will be very familiar to many, and you can see in the green section is really around randomized controlled trials, of which really will inform a lot of the clinical practice guidelines that we have. And now we're very fortunate in Australia to have living guidelines for stroke. And the aim of the CRE really is also to reduce that 17-year bench to bedside evidence to practice gap that exists, and speed up the translation of new trials into guidelines, and also as part of that learning health systems approach to enhance the uptake of evidence into practice as well. But I think sometimes this hierarchy of evidence actually does injustice to some of the other designs and methods that are quite commonly used in research. And I wanted to flag some of these and really highlight some of the importance of some alternate designs that sometimes are not really, don't feature in the pyramid, and but really are quite critical and now really important in terms of assisting with translation of trials into practice as well. It's really fabulous to see the CRE having consumer engagement and people with lived experience, and the development of the league, or the lived experienced advisory group as well. And this is led by Professor Corley English, and just recently we've been talking about the importance of co-design studies to really make sure that the interventions that we develop with our end users, whether or not that be clinicians, but also patients or people with lived experience, to really make sure that the interventions are fit for purpose, and that we've really thought about some of the issues around translation and uptake in clinical practice, but also thinking about co-designing these interventions with the end users in mind to support that translation. I think that qualitative research is really critical to understand where the problems lay, and the experience of patients or clinicians in developing up these interventions, and really to understand the how and the why and the what, because we know that a trial will tell us whether or not something works or it doesn't, but it won't tell us about how it should be or could be used in practice and embedded into routine clinical practice. And really, that really highlights the importance of things like process evaluations and running alongside randomized controlled trials as well. One of the things that I'll probably focus on as well is really around the importance of well-designed feasibility, acceptability, and pilot studies as well. And now we see a lot of journals in particular, just to highlight as an example, BMC have a journal called Pilot and Feasibility Studies, just solely focused on publishing pilot and feasibility work. That journal in particular won't actually publish anything that doesn't have objectives really that are with an aim of establishing feasibility and really focused around pilot studies in particular. So I think this is often sort of undersold in terms of the importance, but I'm guessing that quite a few of us on the call today have been down the path where we go down the path of exploring something, and then we go, I'm not quite too sure if that's actually going to work or not. And so really a well-designed feasibility and pilot study can be really critical to establish whether or not something is feasible and acceptable to patients, and really thinking about having some really good outcomes that are related to feasibility and acceptability in the design of those studies as well. I'm quite a fan of quasi-experimental design, really to see, I guess, if something is feasible, and if people will use it and how that works in practice. And I think using mixed methods or multi-methods design and establishing the feasibility and acceptability is really critical before getting involved in a larger trial. But today I really wanted to talk a little bit more about the value of cohort studies, and I'll provide a bit of a case study as well, and also think a little bit about trial within cohort study design as well. So I wanted to use the analogy of a tree, just to think really about programmatic thinking, and bear with me on this example till I explain a bit more. So obviously a tree is made up of different components. It has a trunk, which is really important for it to stand tall and to grow. And trunk's the sort of major component of the tree. And when we're thinking about different study designs here, and I'm talking really about cohort study designs, the trunk can be the main vehicle of the study. So it's really critical to that tree standing tall. And obviously the tree has some branches, so these are things that come off of the main body of the study, and these can be branch type studies, but those join the main vehicle, the trunk of the tree as well. The tree also has some twigs. It has some nests, perhaps with some birds, and it has leaves as well, which are all part of the tree. And to use this analogy when we're thinking about a cohort study design and trial within cohort study design, in setting up a well-designed cohort study, and this could be used as the trunk, and we could have branch, nest, and twig type projects off of the tree itself. And underneath any tree as well, lies some solid roots and some foundational work, and that might include things like like qualitative work to establish the need for the cohort study. But really importantly as well, in thinking about the tree, it needs some seeds to grow as well, such as seed funding. So I'll talk just really briefly about a case study in particular that I've worked with Professor Richard Lindley over the last few years in designing, and thinking about this is really foundational work in designing a well thought out cohort study. So we've designed the Western Sydney Clinical Frailty Registry in 2020, so just before COVID hit. And over the last few years, we've enrolled 1,200 patients into this prospective observational cohort study. This initially began with a patient request, so just with $50,000 that enabled us to employ a nurse specialist on a part-time basis to see and recruit patients and follow them up over time. We have around about 25% of that cohort are patients who have had strokes, and the average age of those patients is 83. So, and this is an older cohort and sometimes not well represented in stroke trials, and it's really neat that we have opportunity to have this older cohort as well. Really high mortality and rehospitalization at 12 months, but the spin-off projects really include sort of nest, branch and twig type projects, such as a nurse navigator pilot RCT, linkage studies, and other really important quality improvement work as well. And in terms of impact, we've had 3 advanced trainee projects and 3 trials nurse secondments over the last 3 years as well. So in the last couple of minutes, I really just wanted to talk about budgets as well, and thinking about making the most out of the $50,000 and really thinking quite importantly about budgets when developing a proposal for funding. There's things that are often quite overlooked in stroke trials and stroke research, and I really wanted to just flag a couple of them in particular. And to me, it's really important to budget in for consumer engagement activity and keeping this in line with reimbursement guidance from bodies such as the Health Consumers New South Wales or other bodies that recommend reimbursement fees as well if we're doing co-design studies with stroke survivors or people with lived experience. Another resource that should be thought about and planned into budget is the development of aphasia-friendly resources, and just the time that's required and the expertise in developing some of these resources if you're and that's part of your study as well. But also thinking about dissemination costs, so thinking about really returning the results of the study back to end users of the research. Importantly, a lot of our research is taxpayer funded, and it's really important that consumers, stroke survivors, and the general public have access to the results of those studies as well. And that might be achieved by things like development of project animations or supporting public forums like the Stroke Recovery New South Wales annual forum to provide your results back to the general public. But I think also really importantly, if we think about our piggy bank as well, we really want to show return on investment for that seed funding, and really thinking carefully about how the results of your study can be leveraged for future work. So I think in designing the study, I want to really go back to that analogy of the tree and thinking about what would be sort of potentially another branch of your project and how that tree could grow in the future, and really encouraging you all again to think about that programmatic thinking, leading from one study to the next as well. So I'll wrap up there and I'll hand back over to Vincent and welcome any questions in the Q&A at the end. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Caleb. Very interesting. We'll leave questions for the end, and Nat can now start sharing her presentation. So Natalie Finney is a physiotherapist by background who's moved into clinical trials and has been quite successful in leveraging pilot studies and small grants into a successful career. So Natalie.
Thanks so much, Vincent. I can't see Teams anymore, but can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. And I just want to preface all of this with a big I'm still learning. And these are just some of the things I've learnt along the way. So just an acknowledgement, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people today at home where I live and work and play. So if you have, you're an ECR and you've got an idea, an exciting idea for a project, which lots of you do, and we all get very excited by research, and that's why we're in this business, I guess. But what do you do next? So that's you with your idea. And one big lesson I've learned from Professor Julie Bernhardt, who's a big mentor of mine, she always says, if you've got an idea, run it by 3 people. So just first of all, have some individual chats with 3 people to see if it's a good idea and if it's got legs. But the most important thing to do next, if you think it's got legs, is to pull a team together. You really want to have a team of people around you. And as ECRs, I certainly thought, right, I'm a big girl now, I've got my PhD and I need to be able to do it all. And that is not the case at all. What you want to do is pull a team together because you can't do it all. You don't have all the expertise at all, certainly not. I certainly don't, and I'm a few years after my PhD, but you want to pull the people together that have the expertise. You want to pull your senior mentors in, you want to pull statisticians in, health economists, different disciplines, think out of the box, but really get that team together and have diverse skills. And just remember, one really big thing is you don't need to do it all. Okay, so getting started, it's really tricky, especially when you don't have a lot of money, and as an ECR you absolutely don't have a lot of money, and a lot of the grants that we can go for are small grants. So even though we might have a big idea and we want to change the world, we have to start at the start. And my presentation, like Caleb's, is a lot about thinking about your program of work and where you need to start from. So think about where you want to start and the type of trial you want to do. And so very importantly, again, is bringing that team and that senior mentorship around you. And most importantly, if we're talking about trials and trial designs, talk to your statistician. So I'm super lucky in that I have pretty good access to Professor Leonard Cherlov and Associate Professor Kate Hayward, and they are gurus in trial design. So I've had a lot of help from them. So I absolutely shout out going to your mentors and asking for help. So I like to bring it back to the stroke recovery and rehab roundtables and their trial development framework. So in particularly, I come from a stroke recovery background, but in stroke rehab and recovery trials, we've seen a lot of neutral results, and we need to change up what we're doing. We know big phase 3 trials are really costly in terms of time and money, and so we need to take a step back. And that's where we kind of need to start. So we need to answer some key questions before embarking on those large trials. So firstly, we need to think about how much, what's the appropriate dosage of interventions. And a lot of our interventions in rehab, we actually don't know the answer to this question. So answering that question is important. Answering the what question, what are the key active ingredients in our interventions? What is it that we actually need to be doing? Answering the who are we targeting our interventions to? Are they targeted towards, for example, people with mild stroke, or are they targeted towards people with severe stroke? Because we know one size, that all stroke survivors are not the same, and it's a very heterogeneous population. We also want to answer the question of when is this intervention appropriate in the phases of recovery? Is it something we have to do straight away in the acute phase, or is it something that's great for chronic stroke survivors a couple of years down the track? So if we break it back into these questions, we can do some smaller studies that really can answer help to answer some of these questions. So we can look at some phase 1 and 2A dosing studies to start answering that how much question. These types of trials aren't necessarily inexpensive, but they are a lot cheaper to run than a big phase 3 trial. And also, if we really want to answer the what should we be doing, we really need to be getting onto co-designing our interventions with people with lived experience and clinicians. So that's kind of two types of trial designs that we can start off with. And if you want to find out more about early phase trials, I suggest reading this paper that was by Emily Dalton during her PhD, that tells you a lot about those really early phase, the dose ranging trials. So I suggest you go and read that paper and then talk to clever trial design people if that's what you're interested in. And for an example of an early phase trial with some adaptive trial methodology, I'm doing something called a Boyne 1-2 design, which is a Bayesian optimal interval trial design, and it combines a phase 1 and 2A methodology together. So it's efficient in that we're doing 2 phases of trial all at once. And what we do is we test an intervention at a certain dosage for a small cohort, and then we look at what the data is doing. So it's an adaptive trial, meaning we apply some decision logic around what dose a cohort can complete, and then we either escalate, maintain, or de-escalate the dose depending on what that cohort did. So we're learning from the safety and efficacy outcomes of a previous cohort, and we're responding to the data as we go, meaning it can be quite efficient. And what we can do is we can test it in one population. So that makes the study a little bit smaller in that we're just, for example, in this one, we're just targeting people with mild stroke rather than opening it up to everyone. Okay, And something just to simplify, because these trial designs can be super confusing, but just to simplify it, we're looking for 3 signals. We're looking at, is our intervention safe? So I'm a physical activity researcher, so I want to make sure that I'm not causing people to have falls. I also want to make sure that I'm not causing people to have second strokes or heart attacks, even though that is very unlikely. I want to make sure that my intervention is feasible, that it is not too challenging for people to complete, and that it's not too time consuming or costly for a participant to do. But what we're also looking for, so we're looking about the dosage, but we're also looking for that signal of efficacy. Is it pointing us in the right direction, that we're actually achieving what we want to achieve? Are we increasing people's physical activity and lowering their secondary risk? And if in that early, in these early phase trials, we're showing some sign of efficacy, well, that means that's a good intervention at a certain dosage, whatever dosage we find, that it's a good intervention to take forward into a larger phase trial. And it'll mean, by doing these early phase trials, that we're more likely to have an effect, to find an effect later on in a bigger trial, rather than having these neutral trials. So that's a little bit about an early phase adaptive trial methodology, which is a good thing to do, obviously, before we go and embark on a larger phase 3 trial. If we think about budgeting in trials, there's a lot of considerations and a lot of easy places to slip up, I think. So we need to consider staffing. We know that wages increase, and at uni and clinicians, just recently there's been a massive increase in wages, and that is awesome for all of us, but it also means your trial costs a lot more than what you originally anticipated. So think about staffing. Another really big pitfall with staffing that it's really tricky to budget for is that people leave. Allied health professionals will go off and have babies really commonly, which is great, but then you need to train up a new staff member, and the costs involved, it's not just about training what you need your staff member to do on your trial, it's all of your institutional training. And I know at Uni Melb, there's about a day's worth of online training and things that people need to go to. So that all needs to be factored into your money. Thinking about university systems, so every university has different systems of managing money. At Uni Melb, we have a big budgeting tool we have to submit as we are submitting a grant, and that all needs to be signed off. So that's an important consideration for budgeting. There's a lot of PD, professional development sessions offered for ECRs particularly, and I know at my uni there's a lot of different things about research, but also specifically about budgeting and grants. But most important with a budget, and I have learnt from mistakes in the past, is to make sure you're getting a senior person to look at it. As health professionals, we are not taught anything about money and how to run a budget or anything. I'm still learning, so it's always good to have someone else check it. Some common pitfalls are underestimating how much things cost. So again, that links back to the staffing. And I think I talked about something, overestimating how much you can actually do with your time. It's like you might be thinking, oh, well, I can pitch in and I'll do a bit of that. And sometimes you overestimate how much you can do on a project yourself, unpaid. And another pitfall is not thinking of all the extra things and all the little things. So, for example, I use activity monitoring devices on my participants, and sometimes you can't actually physically get to see them, so you need to post things out to people. So costs of post packs can add up, costs of extra little armbands or things to attach a Fitbit on. So there's just always some little extra things. And I know that seems like not much money, but if you're trying to run a project on a very, very tight budget, these things add up and eat your money away. The other thing is some unknowns. So, for example, if there's traveling to participants' houses or community locations in your budget or as part of your trial, you don't know how far away every participant is going to live. And you can put, like, within Metro Melbourne or a specific distance, but you don't know exactly how far people away are going to live, and so accounting for travel costs for your staff. So it's about learning from others about how they've budgeted for things that aren't definite knowns. And also, if you're lucky enough to have a grant that doesn't have a really strict time limit and that you can keep the grant open, which is great because nothing ever goes to plan. But just remember that wages do increase year on year, and yeah, staffing is a really big cost. Okay, if you're trying to run a tight budget, it's really important to keep track of all costs, just to have a running spreadsheet that you add absolutely everything to. Keep an eye on your funds through the university system. There's often mistakes. So just do like we get a monthly spreadsheet, but there's also a system you can log into at any time. It is a good idea. And I just recently went to a ECR fellow session at uni, and I was really surprised because a lot of people's budgets were really quite wrong. So it's a good idea to keep on top of what should be happening. Another really important thing is, I remember back when I was doing my PhD, and I just had a little hospital grant. And as part of my PhD, we were having blood tests as for the participants. And there was like a period of about a year where the pathology department didn't charge me. And I was like, oh, ripper, I've got all this money back. But you know what? About a year later, it came back and they put their invoices in. So don't be too excited about errors that are in your favour. Always remember that they can come back to bite you. In terms of leveraging towards large grant applications, it's really important, like Caleb said, to think about your story and your program of work. So thinking about that you want to inform intervention development using reviews and qualitative studies, which can be those smaller things. Then you can co-design an intervention, and then that will lead to testing the intervention. And if you can put into a large grant, and just bear in mind that I've not been yet attempted a really large grant, so this is just what I've heard from others, not from personal experience. But you know, if you can show that you've co-designed and really put a lot of thought into your intervention, you're more likely to get a grant to then test that intervention. You know, people are really looking, granting bodies are really looking for having that lived experience involvement. Then you can test in an early phase trial. And if you've got successful results from an early phase trial that are showing that signal of efficacy, you can show we are ready to go into that bigger trial, into a later phase trial. You can say we've done this, we've shown that we've got our sites ready, we've shown that we've been able to run this intervention, and we've got all our contacts and it's all set up and ready to go. But in addition to that, we have a signal of efficacy that shows that this intervention is likely to work. And then there's other things you can do thinking about your program of work. You know, you can say, look, we've done this in a mild stroke population. Now we want to see if it translates to a moderate stroke population. And again, you've got everything set up. So we're ready to go. We don't need to pay for all of those infrastructure costs. We can just pick up what we've got and put it into another population if that's appropriate. And also same thing in terms of phase of recovery. You might have tried something in a subacute setting and now we're ready to try it in a community setting. So that's just some thoughts. But remember, you know, life is never simple, and it might not always be a logical straight line, but that's just some ideas of how you can think about your own program of work. But most important for ECRs is the team and having really good mentoring and people around you. Remember, in your team, you want to think about diversity in terms of discipline and expertise in gender, career stage, institution and geographical area, in terms of your cultural background, because we'll all bring different things, but really importantly, including people with lived experience on your research team. And just a little message from me that, you know, try to work with people that you want to work with. I think life's too short to be putting people on grants just because you should, you know, you want to get enjoyment out of your work. So just work with people you want to work with, because that's where you'll do your best work. And I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Natalie. And now we'll move on to Emily.
Thanks. Can you hear me there? And my slides are up?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to introduce Emily Ramage is a postdoc at the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health, and is also has a background in physiotherapy.
Thanks. Yes, thank you. I'm from the Florey. My background, as mentioned, is physiotherapy, and I'm going to be talking about, so you've got an idea and what can you do with it? And I think my experience is as a very, very early career researcher who had an idea, but it was a shared idea within a collaboration, and what we did with a small grant. So I'll try not to repeat too much from the other fantastic presentations, but definitely echo all their advice. The project that I was involved in was the Enable pilot trial, and that was a secondary prevention trial in stroke, and it was the delivery of a physical activity and a diet intervention that we had previously co-designed with people with lived experience, and we had fantastic lived experience on our team with Meredith Burke, and we were very excited about our project, but I think sometimes excitement can turn to a bit of terror when you actually realise you've got the money and you need to know what to do with it and make sure that this project is going to work. So one of the big questions in my mind is, how on earth do I manage a budget? As Nat mentioned, as a clinician, that wasn't something I had a lot of skills in. And my big tip is ask an expert, and ask an expert very early. This is my PhD supervisory team. My principal was Professor Coralie English from the University of Newcastle, also Kathy Sade, Liz Lynch and Amanda Patterson, and between them they had a lot of experience in clinical trials and running budgets, so that was really critical for me. As mentioned, teams are really important, and I definitely wouldn't have been able to get through that without all their support. And my second tip is work to your strengths. So if you know you can do something really well and you've got things that you're maybe not so good at, maybe outsource those to someone who has those skills. And that's why a lot of the budget, so I had a $50,000 grant from the Stroke Foundation to help support the Enable pilot trial, and some of that went to our amazing trial manager, Margaret Galloway, who was our trial manager throughout, and definitely helped along with Coralie in terms of managing the budget and keeping me on track and making sure things are running well. I think when you get $50,000, it does, to me at the time, sounded like a lot of money, but to run a fully powered trial to test the Enable interventions we were hoping to do, it would have involved hundreds of people and cost a lot of money. So we had an underpowered trial because we were looking at a pilot trial. But pilot trials are really important because it's not ethical really to take something to a fully powered trial and involve hundreds of people unless you're pretty certain that what you've got is going to work and you've got all your processes in place. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about our pilot trial and probably what I learned and what we could and maybe what we couldn't do within our budget. So this was a trial that ran over the COVID-19 pandemic, so it probably did take a little bit longer and maybe cost a little bit more than maybe if it had a run outside of that. We had 40 participants in a 4-arm randomised pilot trial, and we started recruiting in about March 2020, and we finished our final 12-month follow-up at the start of 2023. But spoiler alert, it didn't cost us $50,000 to complete this pilot trial. It probably cost us just up of $100,000. But I'll talk a little bit more about that and how that happened and evolved and what we did as we went through. A bit about a pilot trial. The purpose of a pilot trial is to investigate uncertainty about a future randomised clinical trial. And so questions I had and we had in terms of ours, and this isn't a comprehensive list, but just as an example, can we recruit the number of participants we would need for a fully powered trial with the number of centres that we've got involved in the time that we're hoping to? Will stroke survivors actually want to take part in our intervention? Will we be able to collect the outcome measures? One of the outcome measures we were looking at was an active PAL, which is a physical activity monitor, which we would post out to people. They would apply themselves with waterproof tape, and then they'd wear it for a week and post it back to us. And we weren't really sure if that was going to be something that people would be happy or able to do. Another one of the big questions we had was, will the outcome measures we're looking at, are they too onerous? Is it going to take people too long, and will we not get all the information that we actually want? And really this links back to the aims and objectives of a pilot trial, which are to determine feasibility. And so these questions relate to recruitment feasibility, intervention feasibility, and outcome measurement feasibility. In a pilot trial, you can have outcome measures that are qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. It's not, a one-size-fits-all. Obviously, recruitment rate, adherence and dropouts are quantitative, but you might be looking at acceptability and satisfaction, and that might be in the form of semi-structured interviews, but that might be more expensive and not fit in your budget, so you may have to settle for something like satisfaction surveys. And these are the decisions you're making when you're planning your trial and your budget. You can also have a full process evaluation that runs in parallel with your pilot trial. We were lucky enough to do this with the Enable pilot, but I will say we did have two PhD candidates, myself and Dr. Carly Zachariah from University of Newcastle, were working on this. So we did have, beyond the funding, we also had PhDs and a little bit of extra funding that I'll mention later. Importantly, the number of participants in a pilot study should be based on feasibility. So really, you don't want to be involving more people than you need to work out what you want to work out. So it's the minimum number of people that you need to answer the important questions for your study. Is it going to work if we put it to a fully powered trial? Formal hypothesis testing for effectiveness or efficacy is not recommended. And as I mentioned, it's not really ethical to involve heaps of people in a trial that you haven't really tested to see if it's feasible to work. And it could, because that could be a bad experience for people and unnecessarily and not lead to what you actually want to find out. In saying that, you might be looking at potential for effectiveness or efficacy, and so you might still be looking at those outcome measures and what they might indicate, and that might provide support for funding for a future fully powered trial, but that's not the aim of your pilot trial. As I mentioned, in our study, we did have some great $50,000 from the Stroke Foundation, but we were also looking for other opportunities, and we did get additional funding from other sources that was really important to, I suppose, what we were able to carry out and produce in the end. But we needed to be realistic when we initially only had the smaller bundle of funding about what we could really spend our money on and what were the priorities. So my experts, my supervisory team and the broader team were really important in terms of determining what this was going to be. The other thing I would say is have a look at other projects and what other people have been able to do with similar amounts of money. That might give you some really good ideas in terms of the scope of what your project might be able to achieve, and look out for those other opportunities, just small buckets of money that can make a big difference to your project. What we did within ours was really have a think about what we needed to have in our pilot trial and versus what would be nice to have, and we prioritised. So we needed a REDCap database because we needed that in terms of privacy and requirements of the university. We definitely needed statistical support because that is not my area, and we had a 4-arm pilot trial, and we were looking at, one of the things we were looking at was potential effect, and so we needed a lot of advice on that. We needed lived experience to make sure that what we were developing was relevant and implementable. It was a pilot study, and as I mentioned, we weren't testing efficacy. So blinded assessors would have been an added bonus, but they weren't something that we had to have. So initially, when we didn't have additional funding, we didn't necessarily budget this sort of thing in, because we don't need that efficacy outcome. We just need to test if we can actually assess, and the assessments were acceptable for the participants, but that didn't mean they needed to be blinded. We also hoped to do qualitative interviews, but realised that would require more resources, and until we got those additional ones, that was probably something that we weren't necessarily going to put in. When you are juggling a few grants, it's really important to know your grants. So which grants are those grants that you might be able to keep open a little bit longer, and which ones you need to have it spent within a certain amount of time. And that might mean you need to do a bit of moving around of what you're paying for with which, but it's really important to know that to get the most out of your grants and make your project as good as it can be. So in terms of what you can do with 50K, this is just one little example. As I mentioned, it's really important to have a look at other people's ideas and what they've been able to do. The Stroke Foundation website has some great resources in terms of they've got all the grant recipients for the seed grants, which used to be $50,000. They're now actually up to about $80,000, but they've got some great examples there of what you might like to do with the money if you get it. And that's all from me. Very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Fabulous, Emily, and all the speakers. Thank you very much. We have time for some questions, and I hope it will work. Now, what would you have done differently, knowing what you know now? Maybe Caleb first. And
I think the point that's probably been made throughout as well is around the importance of not over promising and under delivering. So really thinking about what is feasible and what are the true costs of things, and trying not to really make it too big and too overwhelming with what is essentially a small amount of money. So really thinking about the scope and the size of the project, and I think also about how that links to the next thing as well. I think as Natalie raised as well about monitoring budgets, can sort of underestimate that as well, and tracking yourself. You know, there's fancy systems at universities that are really complex with minus figures and red and green and all sorts of dashboards, but actually setting up your own Excel sheet monitoring the outgoings is really, really helpful, particularly when there's questions arise around billing, invoicing, and payment for different things. Just keeping on top of that as well. Yeah.
I can go on from what you were saying at the start, Caleb. I get really excited. I get really, really excited about projects and my research, and that whole just containing it and keeping it realistic and not over promising and under delivering. So just it's hard because I want people to be excited and passionate and everything, but just have a bit of a frame of realism around it as well.
Emily?
I would agree with that. I think one of the challenges about a project is that you put in a budget and you spend up to the maximum, because that's what we do. That's how you get the money. But there's always those unknowns. So it's really important to, as mentioned, don't overpromise, but also you need to have a little bit of a plan for if you do have those extra costs, how you're going to sort that out and build that in. Is there flexibility in some things that you'd be able to cut and still run the trial well?
Thank you. Now we have a question from Nicola, who asks, what are the top 3 places beyond CREs that have 50 to 100K grants available? I think the Stroke Foundation was mentioned, especially, well, if you're in stroke or it's stroke related. Caleb, any, and maybe look like frailty maybe has also other opportunities, and look a little bit outside of your own disease area. It doesn't have to be disease, but it could be another aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that the Heart Foundation schemes as well, Vincent, are really helpful to have a look at as well. But also internal seed funding available at institutes or in universities is a really good place to start. And even if it's a small amount it's amazing actually also how much really of that groundwork, foundational work with 10 and 20,000. I think, not underselling the importance of really high quality qualitative work, survey work, review work and co-design work to inform the intervention. You need all of that to design the intervention that's going to work and going to be feasible and translatable to have real impact. So I think, yeah, have a look at internal schemes and also foundational grants as well too.
And another question.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, your institution, UniMel, we're really lucky, has a lot of small grants, but also your professional associations as well. I know the Australian Physio Association has some very small $10,000 to $15,000 grants.
And we'll pick this up in the next webinar, and we'll discuss some opportunities as well. So Claire has a question about experience with involving uni students as part of studies to help. Is that something you've done, or what's your experience been so far with that? I see everyone smiling and thinking. So it's not clear cut yes, it's not clear cut no. Need to think, I think, is the answer. We have another question. Natalie, regarding the novel trial design you mentioned, where did you start with the creation of this design? Was it a collaboration with your team or based on previous literature?
No, that's Leonard Cherlov. So that you need a statistician for that complex, very complex trial design. So no, I cannot take any credit for that. Yeah, that's Leonard, and still learning is what I have to say.
Fantastic. Now it is 1 p.m. and I'm sure we could go on. I want to thank the three speakers for their very informative talks. I want to thank you, all the attendees, for joining so late, and we had more than 35 people attending, which is great for a first webinar that was announced quite late. And I want to thank Dan Revesz for making the technical capabilities and invitations, etc., available. So we'll look forward to seeing you next time for our webinar. And thanks again to everyone. Bye now.